My father did not look at me when he walked into the courtroom. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I still believed he loved me. That belief had died a long time ago. It hurt because even after everything, even after the papers, the accusations, the stolen accounts, the legal threats, and the silence that followed my mother's death, some foolish part of me still wanted him to look at me like a daughter, just once. Instead, he walked past me in his dark suit, shoulders straight, chin lifted, face cold, like I was nothing more than a stranger trying to steal from him. My older brother Adrian followed behind him with that same arrogant smile he had worn since childhood, the smile that said the room already belonged to him, the smile that said I was only there because I had failed to understand my place. And behind them came my stepmother, Lydia, perfect hair, perfect pearls, perfect sorrow painted across her face. She looked like a woman who had been wronged. That was always her gift. Lydia could turn cruelty into elegance. She could ruin your life and still look like she was praying for you. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my hands folded in my lap, trying not to let them shake. My lawyer, Grace Lynn, leaned closer and whispered, "Breathe, Nora." I nodded, but breathing felt difficult, because across the aisle sat the man who had raised me to believe honesty mattered, and in less than 10 minutes, he was going to tell a judge I was a fraud. My name is Nora Whitaker. And that morning, in courtroom 4B, my father tried to erase me from my own mother's legacy. He had already erased me from the family business. He had already erased me from family dinners. He had already erased my mother's voice from every conversation about the company she helped build. Now he wanted the court to erase my claim too. All because of one trust file. One file my mother had created before she died. One file my father swore never existed. At least, that was what everyone believed when the hearing began. They believed I was a bitter daughter. They believed I had come back after years away to take money I had not earned. They believed Adrian was the loyal son. My father was the respectable businessman. Lydia was the grieving widow, and I was the problem. That was the story my family had sold, and for most of my life, they had been very good at selling stories. My father, Charles Whitaker, built Whitaker Foods into one of the biggest regional grocery distribution companies in the state. People called him disciplined, brilliant, old-fashioned, and tough. He liked all those words, especially tough. He believed tough men did not explain themselves. Tough men did not apologize. Tough men did not show weakness, and when tough men hurt their daughters, they called it teaching them reality. My mother, Evelyn, had been the opposite. She was calm where he was sharp, patient where he was demanding, warm where he was cold. But do not mistake warmth for weakness. My mother had the kind of strength that did not need to announce itself. She could sit quietly in a room full of loud men, and by the end of the meeting, everyone would realize she had been the only one listening. Whitaker Foods was not just my father's company, no matter what he told people later. It started in my grandparents' small warehouse. My mother managed accounts. She negotiated with family-owned farms. She built relationships with store owners who did not trust my father's aggressive style. My father expanded the company. That was true. But my mother gave it roots. Without her, Whitaker Foods would have been another cold business that cared more about numbers than people. With her, it became trusted. Trusted by farmers. Trusted by small grocers. Trusted by employees who stayed because Evelyn Whitaker remembered their children's names and sent food when someone got sick. When I was young, I thought the company belonged to both of them because that was what everyone knew. Then my mother died, and suddenly, history changed. After her funeral, my father stopped saying, "We built." He started saying, "I built." I built this company from nothing. I carried this family. I made sacrifices no one understands. And every time he said it, my mother disappeared a little more. I was 26 when she died, old enough to understand grief, too young to understand how quickly grief could become opportunity for the wrong people. Lydia entered our lives 9 months later. She had been a consultant hired during one of the company's expansion projects. Elegant, quiet, divorced, very sympathetic. At first, I thought she was just someone my father leaned on because he did not know how to be alone. Then she moved into the house. Then she married him. Then company records changed. Then family conversations changed. Then my mother's office was repainted. That was the first real fight I had with my father after Mom died. I walked into the company building one afternoon and found workers carrying boxes out of my mother's office. Her books, her framed photos, her old desk lamp, the ceramic mug I had given her when I was 12. I asked what they were doing. One of the workers said, Mrs. Whitaker wanted the room cleared. For one confused second, I thought he meant my mother. Then Lydia stepped out wearing cream-colored heels and holding a clipboard. "Oh, Nora," she said softly. "I didn't know you were coming." I looked past her at the emptying office. "What are you doing?" She smiled with sympathy, the kind people use when they are about to be cruel and want credit for being gentle. "Your father thought it was time to repurpose the space." "My mother's office?" "Nora, sweetheart, it has been months." Months. As if grief had an expiration date. I walked into the room and picked up Mom's mug from a box. "You don't get to touch her things." Lydia's smile faded just a little. "Your father approved this. Then he can tell me himself." He did. 10 minutes later, he came down from the conference room, annoyed that he had been interrupted. I held the mug in my hand and asked him, "How could you let her clear Mom's office?" His face hardened. "This is a business, not a museum." That office was hers. And now she's gone. The words landed like a slap. Even Lydia looked down for half a second, but my father did not soften. "Your mother would not want us trapped in the past. You don't know what she would want." His eyes narrowed. "I knew your mother better than anyone." "No," I said quietly. "You knew what she allowed you to see." That was the first time I saw something ugly move across his face after her death. Not pain, not grief, threat. "Nora," he said, low and cold, "you are becoming very difficult." Difficult. That became my new name. When I asked why company shares were being reorganized, I was difficult. When I asked why Lydia was attending board meetings, I was difficult. When I asked why Adrian was suddenly being promoted over employees who had worked there for 20 years, I was difficult. When I asked to see documents my mother had once told me about, I was not just difficult. I was ungrateful. My brother Adrian never asked questions. That was why my father loved him more. Or maybe loved is too generous. My father admired Adrian because Adrian reflected him back without challenge. Adrian had inherited my father's confidence, but none of my mother's conscience. He was charming in public, careless in private, and cruel when no one important was watching. When we were children, Adrian took credit for my ideas. At school, he borrowed money and forgot to repay it. At the company, he learned how to talk like leadership without doing the quiet work leadership requires. But Dad saw him as the future. "Adrian has the stomach for hard decisions," he would say. What he meant was, Adrian did not lose sleep over hurting people. I did. That was my flaw in his eyes. My mother called it my gift. 2 weeks before she died, Mom asked me to visit her alone. She was at home by then. In the downstairs bedroom we had turned into a care room because the stairs had become too much. The curtains were open. Sunlight fell across the blanket. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. "Nora," she said, "there may come a time when you need to stand alone." I told her not to talk like that. She smiled sadly. People always say that when someone is trying to prepare them. I sat beside her and held her hand. Her fingers were thin, but still warm. "Your father is not evil," she said. I looked away. Mom, he is not, but he is proud. And pride can make good people do terrible things if they keep choosing it. I did not know then how true that sentence would become. She continued, I have made arrangements. What arrangements? For you. My stomach tightened. I don't want anything. I know. That's one reason I trust you. She reached under the blanket and pulled out a small envelope. It had my name written across the front. Keep this somewhere safe. Do not open it unless things become impossible. What does that mean? You'll know. I hated that answer. Mom, tell me. She squeezed my hand. There is a file, a trust file. It protects your share of what I built. I frowned. My share of the company? Not just money, she said. Authority, records, proof of what was promised. Promised by who? Her eyes moved toward the hallway, though no one was there. Your father and I agreed long ago that you and Adrian would both inherit, but not equally in control. Adrian would be given a role. You would be given protection. Protection from what? She looked at me for a long time. From being erased. I felt cold. Mom, why would anyone erase me? She smiled then, but it broke my heart because it was full of fear she was trying to hide. Because you see too much. I wanted to ask more, but she started coughing, and the nurse came in, and the conversation ended. A week later, she was gone. I kept the envelope. I did not open it right away. Maybe I was afraid. Maybe I was grieving. Maybe I still believed my father would never truly betray me. That is the strange thing about family. Even when they show you who they are, your heart keeps searching for the person you needed them to be. For the first few months after Mom's death, I tried to keep peace. I went to work. I helped with accounts. I answered supplier questions. I checked on employees. I stayed out of Lydia's way. I told myself Dad was grieving badly, and grief made people selfish. Then one morning, I arrived at the office and found my keycard no longer worked. At first, I thought it was a system error. The receptionist, Marcy, looked uncomfortable when she saw me standing by the door. Sorry, Nora, she said quietly. Mr. Whitaker changed access levels. My father? She nodded. Why? Her eyes flicked toward the security camera. You should talk to him. I called him. He did not answer. I called Adrian. He answered on the 5th ring. What's up? My access card doesn't work. Oh, yeah. Dad mentioned restructuring. Restructuring my access? You're not really part of operations anymore. I actually laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Adrian, I have handled half the supplier accounts for years. Mom handled them. You helped. That sentence told me everything. Mom handled them. You helped. History was changing again. Put Dad on the phone. He's in a meeting. Then tell him I'm downstairs. He knows. My throat tightened. He knows I'm locked out? A pause. Then Adrian said, Nora, don't make a scene. That was how I found out I had been removed from Whitaker Foods. Not with a meeting, not with a letter, not even with the courtesy of a conversation. A locked door. A receptionist who could not meet my eyes. And my brother telling me not to make a scene. I went home and opened the envelope my mother had given me. Inside was a handwritten note and a small silver key. The note said, If they deny the trust, ask for the blue file. If the blue file disappears, call Marianne Hale. Do not let them tell you that you imagined what was promised. Marianne Hale. I knew the name. She had been my mother's personal attorney years earlier, before my father moved everything to the company's legal team. I called the number written at the bottom of the note. Disconnected. I searched online. Marianne Hale had retired and moved out of state. I left messages at old offices. Nothing. For 6 months, I tried to get answers quietly. I asked Dad directly about the trust file. He looked at me like I had insulted him. There is no trust file. Mom told me there was. Your mother was heavily medicated near the end. I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. She knew exactly what she was saying. His voice hardened. She was dying, Nora. Don't turn her confusion into a weapon. I stared at him. That was the first time I understood he would use even her illness against her words. Adrian backed him. Of course. Maybe you misunderstood, he said. You always hear things emotionally. Lydia went further. She suggested grief counseling. She said I was clinging to unfinished conversations because I could not accept loss. Then came the accusation that changed everything. Money had gone missing from a supplier adjustment account. Not a huge amount compared to the company's size, but enough. The account had once been handled by my mother, then me, then, after I was locked out, Adrian. But when the internal review happened, my name appeared in the report. My login, my approval credentials, my digital signature, all used after I had been removed from the building. I confronted my father. He sat behind his desk, Lydia beside him, Adrian near the window. Just like always. Same formation. Power in the chair, poison beside him, cowardice near the exit. I placed the report on his desk. You know I didn't do this. He did not touch the paper. I know the records show your credentials. My access was cut off before these transactions. Adrian sighed. Remote access exists, Nora. I turned to him. You used my login. His eyebrows lifted. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Dad slammed his hand on the desk. Enough. I looked back at him. They framed me. No, he said coldly. You got caught. For a second, I could not breathe. Lydia spoke softly. Nora, if you were struggling financially, you could have come to us. I stared at her. There it was, the story. They were not just erasing me now. They were staining me, making me dishonest, making me desperate, making sure that if I ever spoke about the trust, people would think I was only chasing money because I had already been caught taking it. I left that office shaking, not with fear, with rage, clean rage, the kind that burns away denial. I hired Grace Lynn 2 days later. Grace was not warm. She did not hold my hand. She did not speak in comforting phrases. She listened, asked sharp questions, took notes, and then said, Your family is either very confident or very sloppy. Which one is better for me? Sloppy. Which are they? She looked at the documents. Both. We filed for access to estate documents, company records connected to my mother's ownership, and any trust instruments naming me as beneficiary. My father's legal team responded aggressively. They denied the trust existed. They claimed my mother's estate had been settled properly. They claimed I had no operational rights. They claimed I had raised these issues only after being confronted about fraudulent account activity. Fraudulent. That word became attached to me. People in town heard whispers. Former company employees stopped returning calls. One supplier who had known me since I was 17 said, I hope things work out, in a tone that meant he was no longer sure who I was. That was the cruelest part of being framed. Not everyone believes the lie, but enough people hesitate, and hesitation is lonely. The case moved slowly. Legal battles do not feel like movies. They feel like waiting rooms, invoices, emails, and waking up at 3 a.m., wondering if truth has enough proof to survive. For almost a year, my father's side controlled the story. They had the company, the records, the lawyers, the reputation. I had my mother's note, a silver key, and a memory they called confusion. Then came the first hearing. The purpose was simple: compel production of documents and address my request for temporary protection against destruction of estate-related records. But my father's legal team turned it into a performance. They filed a response painting me as unstable, financially motivated, and possibly responsible for internal fraud. Grace warned me before court. They may attack your credibility. I know. No, Nora. I mean directly. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. Courtroom 4B smelled like old wood and coffee. My father sat straight at the defense table. Adrian looked bored. Lydia dabbed at her eyes when the judge entered, though nothing sad had happened yet. Their attorney, a polished man named Victor Sloan, stood and began speaking in a voice built for expensive rooms. He described my claim as a grieving daughter's misunderstanding. He said my mother had been ill. He said no trust document had been located. He said I had become hostile after losing access to a company role I was never officially promised. Then he said the line that made my whole body go cold. Your Honor, we cannot ignore that Ms. Whitaker is currently under internal investigation for fraudulent account activity. Grace stood immediately. Objection. There has been no criminal finding, no independent audit, and no foundation for that characterization. The judge looked at Sloan. Careful, counsel. Sloan nodded with fake humility. Of course, Your Honor. I will rephrase. There are serious concerns about Ms. Whitaker's credibility and financial conduct. Credibility. Financial conduct. Words clean enough for court, dirty enough to destroy. Then my father asked to speak. His attorney pretended to hesitate, then allowed it. Of course it had been planned. Dad stood slowly. For the first time that morning, he looked directly at me. Not like a father, like a witness identifying a suspect. Your Honor, he said, voice heavy with false pain. It breaks my heart to say this, but my daughter has not been truthful. There is no hidden trust. There is no secret file. My late wife would never have created such a thing behind my back. Nora has struggled since her mother passed, and now she is trying to claim what was never hers. He paused. Then he looked at me and said, She is a fraud. The room went quiet. I heard someone behind me shift in their seat. Grace's hand moved toward my arm, but she stopped herself. My father kept looking at me, and that was when something inside me became very still. Fraud. He had called me that in front of the court, in front of strangers, in front of my brother, in front of my mother's memory. I expected to cry. I did not. I expected to shake. I did not. Instead, I thought of Mom's note. Do not let them tell you that you imagined what was promised. Grace stood. Her voice was calm, but sharp enough to cut glass. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker has just demonstrated exactly why independent review is necessary. My client is not asking this court to award her anything today. She is asking that records not be hidden behind the word family, while her credibility is attacked with unsupported allegations. The judge listened. Sloan objected. Grace responded. Legal words moved around the room, but I barely heard them. I was still hearing my father. She is a fraud. At the end of the hearing, the judge ordered limited production. Not everything Grace wanted, but enough to matter. My father looked annoyed. Adrian looked irritated. Lydia looked concerned in that theatrical way of hers. As we packed our things, Dad walked past me. He stopped just long enough to say under his breath, You should have let this go. I looked up at him. And you should have told the truth. His face hardened. I did. No, I said. You performed. For a second, he looked like he might say something crueler. Then he walked away. I thought that day was the lowest point. It wasn't. The lowest point came 2 weeks later, when an envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, no note, just a photocopy of a company memo. It showed that my login credentials had been reactivated 3 days after my access card was disabled. Authorized by Nora Whitaker. I stared at the paper for so long the room seemed to tilt. Proof, not all of it, but a crack. Grace filed it immediately. Their side claimed the memo was incomplete, possibly fabricated, taken out of context. That became their favorite phrase. Out of context. A person can do almost anything if they later call the evidence incomplete. Then, just when I thought we might finally get somewhere, the company claimed several archive boxes connected to my mother's old office had been misplaced during building renovations. Misplaced. My mother's office was cleared. Her records disappeared. The trust file never existed. My login was used, but somehow not by them. Every road ended at a locked door, and every locked door had my father standing behind it, telling the world there was nothing inside. For months, Grace pushed. Subpoenas, motions, requests, depositions. My father's side delayed everything. Adrian became forgetful under questioning. Lydia became emotional. Dad became offended. The more they denied, the more expensive truth became. I sold my car to keep paying legal fees. I moved into a smaller apartment. I stopped going out, stopped answering most calls, stopped expecting anyone to believe me quickly. But every time I considered quitting, I opened my mother's note. If they deny the trust, ask for the blue file. If the blue file disappears, call Marianne Hale. Do not let them tell you that you imagined what was promised. I searched for Marianne again and again. Old records, bar association listings, archived firm pages, former colleagues, nothing useful. It was like she had vanished from the professional world completely. Then, one Friday evening, Grace called. I found something strange. What? Marianne Hale didn't just retire. She transferred her client files to a private records custodian before closing her practice. My heart started pounding. Can we contact them? I already did. And? They require proof of authority. We may need a court order. Do they have the file? A pause. They didn't confirm, but they didn't say no. That was the first real hope I had felt in months. Hope is dangerous when you are tired. It can make you stand too quickly. It can make you believe the floor is solid before testing it. Grace moved fast. She filed a request. Their side objected immediately. They argued it was a fishing expedition. They argued any such file would be privileged. They argued Marianne Hale had no relevance to the estate. But the judge had already seen enough delays to become impatient. A second hearing was scheduled. This time, my father looked less confident when he entered. Not afraid. Not yet. But less certain. Adrian whispered with Sloane before the hearing began. Lydia kept checking her phone. Grace sat beside me with a thin folder and a calm face. Whatever happens, she said quietly, do not react to them. I'll try. No, decide. So I did. The hearing began. Sloane argued that my pursuit of the Hale records was harassment. He said I was dragging my late mother's name through unnecessary legal confusion. He said again that there was no evidence of a trust. Grace stood. Your Honor, my client has presented a handwritten instruction from Evelyn Whitaker referencing a blue file and attorney Marianne Hale. We also have evidence that Ms. Whitaker's company credentials were reactivated after her access was removed. The defense has denied relevant documents exist, while simultaneously claiming certain records were misplaced. At minimum, independent records may clarify whether estate-related documents were created. The judge looked at Sloane. Where are the archive boxes from Mrs. Whitaker's office? Sloane adjusted his glasses. My understanding is that during renovations, several boxes were moved to off-site storage and cannot currently be located. The judge frowned. Convenient. That one word changed the air. Sloane stiffened. Dad's jaw tightened. Grace did not smile, but I felt her energy sharpen. The judge granted the request. A court order would be issued to the records custodian. If any file connected to Evelyn Whitaker, Nora Whitaker, or the alleged trust existed, it had to be produced. My father stared straight ahead. Adrian looked down. Lydia stopped pretending to cry. For the first time I saw it. Not panic, but the beginning of it. After the hearing, my father did not stop to speak to me. Adrian did. He caught me near the courthouse steps while Grace was taking a call. Nora. I turned. He looked angry, but underneath it there was something else. Nervousness. You're making a mistake. I almost laughed. You keep saying that. Because you are. If there's no file, why are you worried? His mouth tightened. I'm worried about Dad. No, you're worried about what he told you was safe. That hit. I saw it in his eyes. For 1 second, Adrian looked like a boy who had been promised the house would never catch fire, then smelled smoke. What did he tell you? I asked. He looked away. Drop it. No. Then don't say I didn't warn you. He walked off. Grace came up beside me. What did he say? That I'm making a mistake. She watched Adrian climb into my father's car. Good. Good? People only warn you away from empty rooms when they know something is inside. The file arrived 11 days later. Not to me, to the court, then to Grace. She called me at 7:12 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was sitting on the floor of my apartment eating toast for dinner. My phone rang. Grace. I answered immediately. Nora, she said, and for the first time since I hired her, her voice sounded different. Not excited, not calm, heavy. What happened? The file arrived. I stood too fast. The plate slid off my lap. Toast hit the floor. What file? The blue file. My whole body went cold. And? A pause. Nora, you need to come to my office. Tell me. I will, but you should see it yourself. Grace. She exhaled. It exists. The trust exists. And that's not all. My hand went to the wall to steady myself. What else? There are letters, share documents, a sworn statement from your mother, and an addendum. What addendum? Grace was silent for a moment. Then she said, one that names what should happen if your father ever tried to deny your inheritance. I did not sleep that night. I went to Grace's office before sunrise. She was already there. The blue file sat on the conference table. It was real. A thick folder with a faded blue cover. My mother's name printed on the tab. Evelyn Whitaker Trust Instructions. My hands shook when I touched it. For months, they had called me confused, bitter, unstable, fraudulent. For months, they had made my mother's final words sound like a hallucination. And there it was, blue, ordinary, real. I opened it. The first page was a letter from my mother to Marianne Hale. The second was a trust summary. Then company share records. Then voting protections. Then a sealed statement. Grace sat across from me and said nothing while I read. My mother had written clearly, I leave my beneficial interest and protected voting rights in Whitaker Foods to my daughter, Nora Elaine Whitaker. This arrangement is made because Nora has demonstrated judgment, patience, and ethical concern for the future of the company. Adrian is to receive financial benefit, but not controlling authority unless Nora willingly agrees. I stopped reading. Tears blurred the words, not because of the money, Because my mother had seen me. She had trusted the very parts of me my father mocked: judgment, patience, ethical concern. Grace slid a tissue box toward me. I ignored it and kept reading. The trust included instructions that my father was to serve as temporary managing trustee only until formal transfer after her death. Temporary, not permanent. He had never transferred control. He had never told me. He had never acknowledged the trust. Then came the sworn statement. In it, my mother wrote that she feared Charles might attempt to centralize control after her death, under the belief that strength requires singular authority. That sounded exactly like her, kind even in warning, precise even in pain. Then I reached the addendum. The page was signed 6 weeks before she died. My mother's signature was weaker than usual, but unmistakable. The addendum stated that if Charles Whitaker, Adrian Whitaker, or any company officer attempted to deny the existence of the trust, remove Nora from company access without cause, or accuse her of misconduct to undermine her claim, then an independent audit and immediate transfer review would be triggered. I looked up at Grace. She knew. Grace nodded. She prepared for this. I looked back down. There was more. A sealed envelope inside the file. My name written across it. This handwriting was shakier than the note I already had, but it was hers. Grace said softly, "You don't have to open that here." But I did. Inside was a letter. "Nora, if you are reading this, then someone has tried to convince you that truth needs permission from power. It does not. Your father is a complicated man. I loved him, but I also knew him. He believes control is protection. He believes doubt is disloyalty. He believes the loudest person in the room is usually right. You and I know better. Whitaker Foods will need someone who remembers people are not numbers. I wanted Adrian cared for, but I did not want him unchecked. I wanted your father respected, but not obeyed blindly. And I wanted you protected because I knew you would be punished for asking the right questions. If they call you difficult, let them. If they call you ungrateful, let them. If they call you a fraud, remember this file. You are not stealing a legacy. You are defending one. Love, Mom." That was when I cried. Not quietly, not gracefully. I cried like the daughter I had not allowed myself to be for too long. Grace let me. When I could breathe again, she placed another document in front of me. "What's that?" "A records log from Marianne Hale's office. It shows the trust file was copied to your father's company counsel after Evelyn's death." I stared at it. My tears stopped. "What?" "Your father's legal team received notice." He knew. Grace's face was grim. "Yes." I looked at the blue file, then at the letter, then at the proof that my father had known the trust existed while calling me a fraud in court. Something inside me went very quiet, not numb, ready. "What happens now?" I asked. Grace closed the file carefully. "Now we stop asking them for the truth." She looked at me. "And start making the court read it back to them.